My name is Ryan Combs, and for about a year and a half, I worked as a contract propulsion test engineer at a private testing facility in the New Mexico desert. I'm not going to give you the exact location, and I'm not going to use the real name of the company that ran it, because some of what happened out there, I still have not fully made peace with, and there are people I care about who I do not want anyone showing up at their door because of something I said on the internet. If you have ever driven across the middle of New Mexico on one of those long, flat highways, you have probably passed a stretch of desert where a chain-link fence runs along the road for a mile or two. No sign, no visible gate, nothing but a dirt road turning off into the scrub with a small guard shack set back a few hundred yards. Most people do not think twice about places like that. I did not either, until I worked behind one of those fences myself. My father worked at that same facility in the 1980s. He was a propulsion technician under a NASA contractor from 1982 to 1987, and in my entire life, he never once talked about it. Not until the week before he died, when he sat me down at his kitchen table and handed me a list of 6 rules. He told me if I ever ended up working near that site, I needed to follow every single one, and he told me not to ask him why. I thought it was the kind of thing a dying man says when his mind starts to slip. I was wrong about that. Those 6 rules kept my family alive, and by the time I understood what they were actually protecting us from, I had already come close to breaking 2 of them. 6 months before any of this started, I lost my job as a mechanical engineer at a hydraulic systems company outside Albuquerque. My position got eliminated in a round of layoffs that took out almost a third of the engineering staff. I had a wife, Laura, and a 7-year-old daughter, Emma, and a mortgage payment that did not care that my job no longer existed. I spent almost 3 months applying for anything I could find before a staffing agency called about a contract position with a defense contractor doing propulsion testing work. The recruiter, a woman named Denise, would not tell me much over the phone. She said the position was for a test engineer at a facility called Vaughn Canyon, out past a small town named Alma Creek, working under a contract that supported NASA propulsion research. The pay was almost double what I had made at my previous job. I asked her why the pay was that high for a contract position in the middle of nowhere. She said it was hazard pay and remote location pay combined, and that most people did not stay more than a year or 2 out there because of how isolated it was. That should have concerned me more than it did. I heard the number on the offer letter and said yes before I let myself think it through any further. The week before I started, Laura was going through a box of my father's belongings that I had never fully unpacked after he passed. He died 5 months earlier from a sudden heart attack, alone in his recliner on a Tuesday afternoon. Inside that box, under some old photographs and a broken wristwatch, Laura found a small spiral notebook, the kind you buy off a rack at a drugstore, with his handwriting filling about a dozen pages. Most of it was nothing, a grocery list, an old car repair estimate. But on one page, in handwriting pressed hard enough into the paper that you could feel the impression on the other side, there were 6 numbered rules, and underneath them, a single line that read, "If you ever work near the old test site, follow every one of these and do not ask why." I remembered my father working somewhere out in the desert when I was very young. He left that job when I was 2 years old and never spoke about it again. Anytime I brought it up as a kid, he changed the subject or told me it was boring paperwork, nothing worth discussing. Laura handed me the notebook and asked if it had anything to do with the job I was about to start. I told her it was probably just an old man being an old man. I packed it in my bag anyway, more out of sentiment than anything else. Laura was not thrilled about the job. She asked me more than once if there was another option, something closer to home, something that did not require me to be gone for entire shifts with almost no cell service. I told her we did not really have another option, not with the savings we had left and Emma starting 2nd grade in the fall. She let it go, but I could tell she never stopped being uneasy about it, even before either of us had a reason to be. Vaughn Canyon Test Annex sat about 45 minutes outside Alma Creek, down a 2-lane road that turned to gravel for the final 6 miles. The first time I drove out there, I passed one gas station, a diner that looked like it had not been renovated since the 1970s, and then nothing but scrub brush and open sky for half an hour straight. My phone signal dropped to a single bar about 15 minutes before I reached the gate, and it never came back the entire time I worked there. The facility itself was larger than I expected, a cluster of low concrete buildings, 2 large test stands built into the side of a rock formation, and a perimeter fence with cameras mounted every 100 yards or so. At the gate, a guard checked my identification against a list, had me sign in, and radioed ahead before letting me through. Inside the main building, I spent most of my first morning in a windowless conference room signing paperwork, a standard employment contract, a security clearance application, and a non-disclosure agreement that ran 14 pages and used the phrase criminal prosecution 4 separate times. The man running my orientation was Warren Locke, the facility director, a man in his 50s with a flat, controlled voice, the voice of someone who had spent decades telling people exactly as much as they needed to know and nothing more. He walked me through the basic operation of the site, static testing of solid and liquid propellant motors under a research contract connected to NASA, standard safety procedures, chemical exposure protocols, emergency evacuation routes. All of it sounded like any other industrial testing job I had worked before. Then he handed me a laminated card and told me these were 6 site-specific safety rules, separate from the standard safety manual, and that I needed to memorize them before my first shift. I looked down at that card, and for a moment my mouth simply would not work because the 6 rules printed there, word for word, were the same 6 rules written in my father's handwriting in a notebook sitting in my bag out in the parking lot. I asked Warren Locke if these rules had been in place a long time. He looked at me for a second longer than felt normal and said they had been standard procedure since before he started at the facility. He did not ask why I wanted to know, and I did not tell him. Later that afternoon, a technician named Harold Voss came by to walk me through the equipment on the test floor. Harold looked to be in his 60s, gray-haired, with the kind of permanent squint that comes from 30 years of desert sun. When he shook my hand and heard my last name, something shifted in his expression. Just for a second, the look of a man doing quick math in his head. He asked me straight out if I was related to a Walter Combs who worked there in the 80s. I told him Walter Combs was my father. Harold did not say anything else about it right then. He nodded slowly and told me to follow him. And for the rest of that day, every time he thought I was not looking, I caught him watching me a little too closely. That night, back at the small rental house Laura and I had taken in Alma Creek, I set my father's notebook next to the laminated safety card the facility had given me and read through both lists side by side under the kitchen light. Rule number 1, never talk about Roswell. Rule number 2, if you see green slugs in the break room, never use salt. Rule number 3, do not ask about missing scientists. Rule number 4, if a government official demands answers, pretend you are complying. Rule number 5, never bring your dog to work. Rule number 6, never let your child out alone after dark. 6 rules, and my father had known every single one of them more than 30 years before I ever walked through that gate. The first rule I watched get tested was the one about Roswell, and it happened during my second week on the job. Vaughn Canyon ran 3 rotating shifts, and the break room sat near the center of the main building, a plain space with vending machines, a coffee maker, and a handful of tables. Most days, 10 or 12 of us cycled through there during the mid-shift break, and the conversation ran the same as it would on any job site. Sports scores, complaints about the weather, complaints about the cafeteria food trucked in twice a week from town. Nobody talked about UFOs. Nobody made jokes about aliens. In a facility doing propulsion testing about 100 miles from a town famous for exactly that kind of thing, the total absence of jokes about it had started to feel less like a coincidence and more like something people had trained themselves never to do. I noticed the pattern my first few days, but I did not understand what I was seeing until Dale Prout sat down across from me on a Thursday afternoon. Dale was 23, fresh out of a 2-year technical program, hired about a month before I started. He was the type who filled silence without thinking about it, cracking jokes whether or not anyone laughed. That afternoon, another technician mentioned his truck had broken down on the drive-in, and Dale grinned and said something about the little green men towing it off toward Roswell for spare parts. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, and the room went quiet in a way that felt physical. Every fork and coffee cup stopped moving at the same exact moment. I looked around the table. Harold sat 2 seats down, completely still, staring at his food. A woman named Priya Anand, one of the electrical technicians, had her eyes locked on the door, as if she were waiting for it to open. Dale looked around too, confused, his grin fading as he realized something had gone wrong without understanding what. Nobody said a word to him directly. Nobody explained that the joke had landed badly. The silence held for what felt like a full minute before people slowly went back to eating, quieter than before. About 20 minutes later, Dale's name was called over the intercom to report to the security office. He came back almost 2 hours later, and he was not the same person who had walked out. Before that afternoon, Dale talked through half his shifts, asking questions, making comments about everything he saw. After that meeting, he worked in silence, giving short answers and looking away whenever anyone tried to draw him into conversation. I caught him alone near the equipment lockers a few days later and asked what had actually happened in that room. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see some part of him wanted to answer, needed to tell somebody. Then he shook his head. "They told me it was a security briefing about classified program names," he said. "That's all I'm going to say about it." I told him that did not sound like something that would take 2 hours to explain. He did not respond. He picked up his tool bag and walked away. I found Harold later that same day, near the equipment shed where he liked to smoke on breaks, despite the facility's rules against it. I asked him directly what the deal was with rule number 1, why an entire room full of adults working a government contract job would go dead silent over a joke about aliens. Harold took a long drag before he answered. He told me the rule was not really about the company protecting some classified program name, even though that was the official explanation everyone was supposed to give if asked. He said the real reason was simpler and worse than that. "The word gets noticed," he said. "Not by the company, not by anyone with a badge. Something out past the test stands, something that's been here a lot longer than this facility has, pays attention when people start asking about that word out loud inside these buildings." He told me he did not know exactly what it was, could not tell me anything more specific, because in 30 years working there, nobody had ever explained it to him either. All he knew was what he had watched happen to people who did not take rule number 1 seriously. I asked what happened to those people. Harold looked at me, and for a second I saw something in his face that was not caution but genuine fear, old fear, the kind that had been sitting in a person for decades. "The company handles it quietly," he said. "The paperwork always says something different than what everybody on the floor actually believes." He would not tell me more than that. He put out his cigarette, told me to keep my mouth shut about rule number 1 no matter how ridiculous it seemed, and walked back inside. For the rest of that week, every time I sat down in the break room, I found myself watching the door the same way Priya had. I never brought up Roswell again, not as a joke, not as a question, not even to Laura when she asked how the new job was going. I told her it was fine, the people were nice, the work was interesting. I did not mention the silence or Dale's face when he came back from that meeting, or the way Harold's hand had trembled lighting that cigarette. Dale never fully returned to who he had been before that afternoon. He still showed up on time and did his job, but the easy way he used to talk had gone out of him. About 2 weeks later, I asked if he was doing okay. He told me he was fine, and then he said something that stayed with me a long time afterward. "I used to think the rules here were corporate nonsense," he said. "Something a lawyer made up to cover the company legally. I don't think that anymore. I'm never testing another one of them." I told him I understood. I did not fully understand yet, not the way I would come to a few weeks later, but I already believed him. About 3 weeks into the job, I got assigned to help digitize a set of old maintenance logs from the archive room. Records going back to the early days of the facility that needed scanning before the physical copies were destroyed under a records retention policy. It was tedious work, but it put me in a room full of file boxes covering 3 decades of Vaughn Canyon history, and I could not stop myself from looking for my father's name. I found him eventually in a personnel roster from 1984, Walter J. Combs, propulsion technician, listed among about 40 other names. Most of those names meant nothing to me. One of them did. A few lines below my father's entry, there was a name, Dr. Elias Fenwick, senior research scientist, and next to it, a termination date in October of 1985 with no reason given, just the word transferred. I only recognized it because that same name, Elias Fenwick, appeared in my father's notebook, written in the margin next to rule number 3, circled twice, with no other explanation beside it. I pulled up the current facility directory on the shared computer terminal and searched for Fenwick. Nothing came back. I checked the retiree and alumni records human resources kept for benefits purposes. Nothing there either. As far as any system I had access to was concerned, a man named Elias Fenwick had never existed at Vaughn Canyon Test Annex, despite appearing on an official roster less than 2 years before my father left the facility for good. I told myself it was probably nothing. People get transferred, records get lost, government contractors have messy paperwork. All of that was reasonable and true, but rule number 3 sat in my head the entire drive home that night. Do not ask about missing scientists. I had a name now. I had a date, and some part of me that had spent my whole childhood wondering why my father never talked about this place needed to know what had actually happened to Elias Fenwick. I started asking around carefully over the next few days, never bringing it up directly, working it sideways into ordinary conversation. I asked an administrative assistant named Connie Baxter if she remembered a Dr. Fenwick from the records department. She told me she had only started in '91 and did not recognize the name. I asked a maintenance supervisor named Roy Hutchins if the name meant anything to him. He went quiet for a second, said he had heard it somewhere before, then changed the subject fast enough that I knew he was leaving something out. That was a Monday. By Monday night, something in the facility had shifted, though I could not point to any single thing at first. I was working overnight that week, running instrumentation checks on an empty test stand, and the building felt different, quieter than the normal quiet of an empty facility at 2 in the morning. A few times I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere down a hallway that should have been locked and empty. Each time I checked, there was nothing there, and the door was locked exactly as it should have been. Tuesday, I asked one more person, a technician named Farid Nasser, who had worked at the facility almost 20 years, if he knew anything about a scientist named Fenwick who disappeared from the records around 1985. Farid did not answer the question. He grabbed my arm hard enough that I felt it the next day and told me to stop asking, right now. And to make sure, I was not alone in the building for the rest of the week. I asked him why. He told me that when people start asking about the missing ones, things start happening on a schedule, and the schedule always runs from Monday night through Wednesday morning. He said he did not know why it worked that way, only that it always had, every time he had seen it happen in 20 years. That conversation happened Tuesday afternoon. I had less than 24 hours left in whatever window Farid was describing, and I did not fully believe him yet, not enough to stop being afraid of something I could not see or explain. Tuesday night, I stayed at the on-site housing the facility kept for overnight contractors, instead of driving 45 minutes back to Alma Creek, since my shift started early Wednesday. The housing was a small dormitory-style building near the perimeter fence, a dozen rooms down a single hallway, mostly empty that week since most of the crew lived close enough to commute. I woke up somewhere around 3 in the morning to the sound of someone saying my father's name softly from just outside my window. Not Ryan, Walter. My father's name, spoken in a voice that sounded exactly like Elias Fenwick would have sounded, except I had never heard Elias Fenwick's actual voice. Not once, not from any recording, not from anyone still willing to talk about him. I do not know how I knew what that voice belonged to. I just knew, immediately and completely, without needing to hear it a second time. I got up and walked toward the window before I had fully thought about what I was doing. My hand was already on the latch when I stopped. Rule number 3 sat in my head, next to something Farid had told me an hour before my shift ended that day, something he had added almost as an afterthought while I was walking out the door. He said the ones who disappeared, all of them, going back decades, had one thing in common. Somebody heard them calling a name shortly before they vanished. Nobody who answered that call ever came back to explain what they had seen. I stepped back from the window and turned on every light in that room. I did not look outside again. I sat on the edge of the bed with my father's notebook in my hands until the sun came up, and the voice did not call out a second time. In the morning, I told Harold what had happened. He did not look surprised. He told me that whatever asks about Fenwick, or any of the others like him, eventually stops asking with words and starts asking with a face and a voice that used to belong to somebody real. He told me I was fortunate to have someone left to explain that to me, because in 30 years, the people who actually opened that window never had anyone left afterward who could tell them why they should not have. Of all 6 rules, the one about the slugs seemed the most ridiculous to me when I first read it, and I think that is exactly why it ended up being the one that hurt the most. Green slugs showed up at Vaughn Canyon with enough regularity that the facility had an actual written procedure for them, laminated and posted next to the break room door alongside the fire evacuation map. If you saw one, or several clustered near a floor drain or an air vent, you were supposed to note the location, report it to facilities management, and stay at least 10 feet away until someone came to handle it. The procedure never explained what handling it actually meant. In my first 2 months, I saw the notice more than once but never saw the slugs myself, and some quiet part of my brain had started treating rule number 2 the way you treat a warning label on a household chemical, technically serious, but not something you expect to matter in your actual life. Marcus Webb had worked at the facility for 26 years, and everybody liked him. He was 58 years old, with a solid, heavy-set build from 3 decades of physical labor, a laugh that carried across an entire building, and a habit of remembering small details about people, birthdays, kids' names, which brand of coffee somebody preferred. He was 6 months from retirement when I met him, already talking about a fishing boat he had picked out at a dealership in Roswell, a 14-foot aluminum boat he planned to spend his first retirement year fishing from with his grandson on a lake in northern New Mexico. Marcus worked facilities maintenance and had a reputation for solving problems fast, using whatever practical solution worked instead of waiting on an official fix. It made him valuable and popular, the guy everyone wanted on shift when something broke at 2 in the morning, because Marcus would have it running again before most people finished reading the manual. I worked with him a handful of times over those first 2 months, small jobs, a stuck valve actuator, a sensor housing that needed resealing. Every time, he had a story ready, usually about his grandson Tyler, A 9-year-old Marcus clearly believed was the smartest kid in New Mexico. He told me once, while we replaced a gasket on a fuel line, that the secret to 30 years in this line of work was knowing when to follow the manual, and when the manual had been written by someone who never actually had to fix the thing at 2 in the morning with a deadline closing in. I laughed when he said that. I did not think about it again until the night everything went wrong. It happened on a Thursday, about 10 weeks after I started at Vaughn Canyon. The facility had a major test scheduled for Friday morning, a full-duration burn on one of the larger motor configurations, the kind of test that took months of preparation and brought people from the contracting company out to observe. Everything had to be ready, every system checked and signed off, and Thursday night was the last chance to fix any problems before the test window opened at 6 the next morning. Marcus was working overnight that Thursday, along with about 6 other technicians spread across different systems, myself included. Around 11 at night, a warning indicator came up on a safety relief valve feeding the propellant storage system, a valve that needed to be manually accessible in case of an emergency vent during the next day's test. The valve itself was fine, but the access panel that let a technician reach the manual override was not closing properly, and when Marcus went to check it, he found the problem. The panel sat low on the wall, close to a floor drain running along the base of the storage building, and that drain was packed with green slugs, more of them than I ever heard anyone describe seeing at once, filling the drain opening and spread across the floor in front of the access panel thick enough that the panel could not seat flush against the wall. Marcus called it in over the radio, following procedure exactly, reporting the location and requesting facility support. The dispatcher on the security desk told him support was tied up on generator maintenance across the property and would not be available for at least 90 minutes. 90 minutes put him past midnight, dangerously close to the final system checks that needed to be done before 4 in the morning. Marcus radioed again, got the same answer, and made a decision that on any other job site in America would have been completely reasonable. He kept a container of rock salt in his truck, the same bag he used every winter to keep ice off his front steps at home. Slugs and salt do not mix. Every gardener in the country knows that. It is one of the oldest, most ordinary pieces of practical knowledge there is. Marcus poured a line of salt across the drain opening and the floor in front of the panel, expecting the slugs to clear enough space for him to reach the override and finish before the deadline. I was about 60 yards away in the instrumentation building when the alarm came through on the radio net. Not a fire alarm, not an evacuation alarm, but a general distress call. Technician down, storage building 2, all available personnel respond. I got there in under 2 minutes, along with Harold and 2 other technicians. What I found, I am not going to describe in detail, and I will not pretend I understood everything I saw in the 10 or 15 seconds before Harold physically pulled me back out of that room and shut the door. Marcus Webb was dead. I know that with absolute certainty. What I do not know, what none of us who were there that night have ever been able to explain to each other in any way that makes sense, is exactly how it happened in the span of time between his radio call and our arrival, a span that could not have been more than 3 or 4 minutes. The drain and the floor around it were completely clear when we got there. No slugs anywhere, just Marcus and salt scattered across the concrete, and a silence in that room heavier than any silence I had ever stood inside before or since. Harold got everyone out, sealed the room, and called it in on a line that did not go through the normal security desk. Within 20 minutes, people I had never seen before were on site, men in plain clothes who moved through the building like they had trained for exactly this kind of night. Warren Locke arrived less than half an hour later, and by the time the sun came up, Storage Building 2 had been cleaned, resealed, and cleared for the 6 o'clock test, which ran on schedule. The official report, the one that eventually made its way to Marcus Webb's family, and the one any outside investigator would ever see, listed his death as an industrial accident involving an unsecured chemical storage container and a fall. It did not mention slugs. It did not mention salt. It did not mention the 90-minute wait for facility support that never should have happened on a night with that much riding on the test schedule. I did not sleep after that shift ended. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for almost an hour before I could make myself drive home, thinking about Marcus talking about his grandson Tyler and that 14-foot boat, 6 months from a retirement he was never going to get. 2 days later, once the facility had settled back into something close to normal, I found Warren Locke in his office and asked him directly what had actually happened to Marcus. I told him I had seen the room. I told him I deserved a real answer, not the version going into any file. Warren Locke looked at me for a long moment, and his voice, when he finally answered, carried no comfort in it at all. Rule number 2 exists for exactly the reason it says on the card, he said. Salt does something to them. Nobody at this facility has ever fully understood what, not in over 40 years of operation, and every single time somebody has used it, someone has died within minutes. Marcus knew the rule the same as everyone else. He made a decision under pressure that any reasonable person might have made, and it killed him anyway. He told me the company would take care of Marcus's family financially, that a generous settlement would be paid out under a workplace accident clause, and that this conversation had never happened. Then he told me to get back to work, because the facility had 2 more tests scheduled that week, and grief was not going to change that. I walked out of his office and found Harold in the break room, sitting alone at the same table where Dale had made his joke about Roswell weeks earlier. I sat across from him and asked if it always happened like that, fast, quiet, cleaned up before anyone outside these walls ever knew something had gone wrong. Harold nodded slowly. He told me Marcus was the 4th person he had watched this happen to in 31 years, and every single time, the explanation that made it into the official record had nothing to do with the truth. He said the company was good at making tragedy look survivable on paper. He said the only real protection anyone ever had was following 6 rules that nobody in a position of authority had bothered to explain, because the people who wrote them decades ago were long gone, and the people enforcing them now understood only that ignoring them got people killed. I asked if Marcus had family beyond the grandson he always talked about. Harold told me Marcus had a daughter, Angela, who lived in Roswell, and that she was the one who would have to sit across from a company representative in a few days and accept a settlement check in exchange for a story about a chemical container and a fall that she would probably know, somewhere underneath the grief, was not the whole truth. I did not have anything to say to that. Harold got up, put a hand on my shoulder, and told me the best thing I could do for Marcus now was make sure I never made the same mistake he did, no matter how much pressure I was under, no matter how reasonable the alternative seemed in the moment. I went home that night and held Emma a little longer than usual before bed. I did not tell Laura what had actually happened at work. I told her there had been an accident, that a coworker had died, and that I was shaken up about it. That much, at least, was true. About 3 weeks after Marcus died, the facility hired a new technician named Sam Ostrander, a quiet guy in his late 20s who had just moved out from Ohio for the job and had not yet been through the informal education the rest of us had picked up the hard way. He knew about the 6 rules from the laminated card during orientation, same as I had, but a card with 6 short sentences does not carry the same weight as watching someone die because of one of them, and Sam had not been there for that. Rule number 5 had always seemed like the strangest one to me in an abstract sense, stranger even than the slugs, because at least the slugs were something you could see and report. A rule about not bringing your dog to work felt almost like a leftover piece of liability, language nobody had bothered to remove from an old document. Sam found out why it was there on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. when a dust storm rolled across that part of New Mexico with almost no warning, the kind that turns the sky a deep reddish brown and drops visibility down to almost nothing within 20 minutes. Sam lived alone in a small rental in Alma Creek with a mixed-breed dog named Cooper, about 4 years old. That morning, before the storm was in any forecast, he had left Cooper in the fenced backyard the way he did every day, with fresh water, shade, and a doggy door leading into the mudroom. The storm knocked out power across most of Alma Creek, and according to what Sam found out later, blew open the gate on his backyard fence hard enough to snap the latch. A neighbor called around noon to say Cooper had gotten loose and was sitting outside Sam's front door in the storm, clearly frightened, refusing to move, and that she could not safely bring him inside without a key. Sam could not leave the facility mid-shift, and none of the emergency contacts he tried could reach Alma Creek before the storm made the roads impassable. He made a call that anyone in that situation probably would have made. He asked his shift supervisor for permission to have someone bring Cooper out to the facility for the rest of his shift, since it had a fenced perimeter and an indoor area where a dog could safely wait out the weather. The supervisor who approved it that day did not think to check the site-specific rules against a request that reasonable sounding. A neighbor drove Cooper out to the gate around 1 in the afternoon, and Sam kept him on a leash in an unused storage room near the main entrance, planning to have him there for maybe 2 or 3 hours until the storm passed and his shift ended. I was walking through that same hallway around 2 in the afternoon, heading toward the equipment lockers, when I saw Cooper standing rigid just inside the storage room doorway, every hair along his back raised, refusing to take another step forward despite Sam gently pulling the leash and trying to coax him in with a treat. I stopped and watched for a minute. Cooper was not barking or growling, just standing completely still, staring down the hallway that led toward the older, unused section of the building near Storage Annex 3, an area sealed off from regular use since before I started working there. His whole body trembled slightly, and his eyes stayed fixed on a point in that hallway that, as far as I could see, was completely empty. Sam laughed it off at first, said Cooper was probably spooked from the storm and the unfamiliar building. He tried again to lead him forward, and Cooper planted his feet and would not move an inch closer, even under steady pressure on the leash. At one point, Cooper made a sound I had never heard a dog make before, not quite a whine and not quite a growl, and pulled himself fully out of the storage room into the main hallway instead. I walked partway down the hallway myself, past the point where Cooper had stopped, just to see what was there. Nothing looked unusual to my eyes. The hallway looked the same as always, plain concrete floor, fluorescent lighting, doors to Storage Annex 3 at the far end. But about halfway down, in a stretch that could not have been more than 15 feet, the temperature dropped enough that I noticed it immediately, sharp and localized in a way that did not match any vent or duct I could see nearby. A few steps further, the temperature returned to normal. I also had the distinct sense, though I could not have proven it to anyone, that the hallway felt longer walking through that cold section than it should have, based on how many times I had walked it before. It was not a dramatic sensation. It was subtle enough that if I had not already spent 2 months learning to notice small wrongness at that facility, I might have written it off as nothing. I went back and told Sam we needed to move Cooper somewhere else immediately. He could see by then that something about this was not normal. Cooper's reaction alone had convinced him of that. We moved Cooper to the front office near the main entrance, as far from that hallway as the building allowed, and Sam checked on him every 20 minutes for the rest of his shift. Cooper calmed down almost completely once he was out of that section of the building, lying quietly under the front desk for the remainder of the afternoon. I told Sam about rule number 5 that evening and showed him the laminated card he had apparently glanced past during orientation without fully registering it. He looked embarrassed and a little pale once he understood what the rule had actually been protecting him from. Cooper never came back to Vaughn Canyon after that day. Sam found a neighbor willing to watch him going forward, and he never again requested an exception to that rule, no matter how bad the weather got. I asked Harold about it a few days later, whether he had ever seen anything like what I saw in that hallway, the cold spot, the sense of distance that did not match what I already knew to be true about the layout. Harold told me he had seen it more times than he could count over the years, always in the presence of an animal, never once on his own without one nearby to react first. Dogs, and animals generally, notice things in that place that human senses just aren't built to catch on their own, he said. It's not that the danger only exists when an animal's around. It's that an animal gives you a warning system a person doesn't naturally have. The rule against bringing pets on site isn't really about liability or cleanliness at all. It's about not giving that warning system a reason to go off in the first place, because once it does, whatever it's reacting to already knows you're there too. About 6 weeks after Marcus died, and roughly 2 weeks after Sam's dog gave all of us a new understanding of rule number 5, the facility received notice of a scheduled audit from the Defense Contract Audit Agency, a routine review of spending under the propulsion research contract that funded most of Vaughn Canyon's operations. The auditor assigned was a man named Gordon Whitfield, scheduled to be on site for 2 full days reviewing procurement records, safety compliance documentation, and general facility operations. Warren Locke called an all-staff meeting the morning before Whitfield arrived, the first time I had seen every employee at the facility gathered in one room at once. He explained that Whitfield held a standard government clearance appropriate for a budget and compliance review, but no clearance whatsoever for anything related to what Warren Locke called, without further explanation, the facility's secondary function. Every employee in that room was expected to treat Whitfield's visit as though Vaughn Canyon Test Annex was exactly what its paperwork claimed it to be, a propulsion research and testing site, nothing more. We spent that afternoon in a briefing that felt less like a safety meeting and more like rehearsal for a play. Warren Locke, and a woman introduced only as a compliance liaison from the contracting company's corporate office, walked us through a list of approved talking points, questions Whitfield was likely to ask, and scripted answers we were expected to give without deviation. We were told which storage areas would be physically locked and marked as under renovation for the duration of the visit. We were told that if Whitfield asked about anything outside the approved talking points, including anything related to unusual safety incidents, we were to say we were not the right person to answer that and refer him to Warren Locke directly. Rule number 4 sat printed on that laminated card the same as the other 5. If a government official demands answers, pretend you are complying. And up until that meeting, I had assumed it referred to some vague general policy about dealing with regulators. Watching Warren Locke lay out an actual operational plan for deceiving a federal auditor made it clear the rule meant exactly what it said, in the most literal sense possible. Gordon Whitfield arrived the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp, a heavyset man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a leather binder full of forms. He was polite, professional, and thorough in a way that made the entire staff visibly tense every time he pulled out a new checklist. He spent the first day mostly in Warren Locke's office and the records room, reviewing procurement documentation, and most of us barely interacted with him at all. The tension started building on the second day, when Whitfield began walking the facility floor to physically verify equipment listed on procurement records against what actually existed on site. Around 10 in the morning, while touring the storage wing with Warren Locke and 2 facility staff, Whitfield stopped in front of a locked door marked Storage Annex 3, the same section of hallway where Cooper had refused to walk 2 weeks earlier, and asked why it was not on the tour itinerary. Warren Locke told him it was closed for asbestos remediation, a story apparently prepared in advance for exactly this possibility. Whitfield, going strictly by procedure, said federal audit guidelines required him to at least visually inspect any area listed on facility floor plans, remediation or not, and reached for the door handle. I was standing about 20 feet away, checking instrumentation readings on an unrelated system, and I watched Warren Locke's expression change for a fraction of a second before he smoothly stepped between Whitfield and the door and explained that active remediation work involved airborne particulates that would require Whitfield to be fitted for a respirator and undergo a medical clearance first, a process that would take at least 2 hours to arrange. Whitfield, clearly annoyed but unwilling to lose 2 hours of his limited schedule, agreed to note the area as inaccessible and move on. I did not know at that moment what was actually behind that door or why the facility needed him nowhere near it. I only knew that Warren Locke's hand, resting on the doorframe as he steered Whitfield away, had been shaking slightly. It was the first time I had seen him lose control of anything, even for a second. The closest call came about an hour later in the break room, when Whitfield sat down uninvited at a table where Dale Pruitt was eating lunch and started asking casual, friendly questions about how long Dale had worked there and what a typical day looked like. Dale answered the first few fine, sticking close to the approved talking points. Then Whitfield asked, almost as an afterthought, whether Dale had ever witnessed any safety incidents during his time at the facility, since the compliance file showed an industrial accident report from about 6 weeks earlier involving a fatality. I was 2 tables away and watched Dale's face go pale. His mouth opened, and for a second I was certain he was about to tell Gordon Whitfield the truth, that a coworker named Marcus Webb had died in a way nobody in that building could actually explain, surrounded by slugs and salt in a room that had been completely clear within minutes of the emergency call. I got up and sat down at the table before Dale said anything, cutting in with a calm, practiced answer about the accident report, sticking exactly to what Warren Locke had briefed us to say: an unsecured chemical container, a fall, a tragic loss the company had handled with full transparency and appropriate compensation for the family. I kept my voice level and my hands still on the table the entire time, even though my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Whitfield studied me for a moment after I finished, the look of a man who had noticed something about Dale's reaction before I stepped in, even if he could not have said exactly what. He asked me directly if there was anything about that incident I thought the audit should be aware of. I told him no, that the report on file was accurate and complete to my knowledge, and that I had not personally witnessed the accident myself, which was close enough to true that it did not feel like I was lying outright, even though every other word out of my mouth in that conversation was built entirely on rule number 4. Whitfield nodded, made a note in his binder, and moved on to his next question about equipment maintenance schedules. The moment passed. Dale did not say another word for the rest of that lunch break, and neither did I. Whitfield finished his review that afternoon and left the facility around 4 o'clock. Thanking Warren Locke for the cooperation and nodding the audit findings would be filed as satisfactory, no further action required, I watched his car disappear down the gravel road toward the highway, and something that had been wound tight in my chest for 2 full days finally started to loosen. That evening, I found Harold in the equipment shed, having his usual cigarette, and told him what happened with Whitfield and the storage annex door, and with Dale nearly breaking under a direct question about Marcus. Harold listened without much reaction until I finished, and then told me something that pulled the tightness right back into my chest. The last time an auditor got past that door, he said, back in 1993, before my time, but still talked about among the older staff when I first started, they didn't just send him home with an unsatisfactory finding on his report. Whatever he saw behind that door followed him home. Within a year, that man was dead, along with 2 members of his family, in circumstances local authorities where he lived never explained. I asked if that was actually true, or the kind of story that gets passed around a place like this, until nobody can tell where the facts end and the fear begins. Harold said he genuinely did not know anymore either, after 31 years, but that he had never once been willing to test it himself, and he strongly suggested I never be willing to test it either. Of the 6 rules my father left me, rule number 6 was the one he had underlined twice in that notebook, and the only one he brought up on his own, without me asking, during the final conversation we ever had at his kitchen table. He told me that week, sitting across from me with a cup of coffee he never drank, that whatever else I did with the other 5 rules, I needed to promise him I would never let my own children go outside alone after dark. Not in that part of New Mexico. Not ever. No matter how safe the neighborhood seemed, or how many other parents let their kids run around outside after sunset without a second thought. I remember thinking it was an odd thing for him to fixate on, since by then we lived nowhere near Vaughn Canyon, in a regular suburban neighborhood outside Albuquerque, where kids rode bikes on the sidewalk until the streetlights came on. I promised him anyway, because it clearly mattered to him, and because a dying man's request is not something you argue with. It took me most of my time at Vaughn Canyon to understand that rule number 6 was not really about the facility at all, not the way the other 5 were. Harold confirmed that for me one evening, a few weeks after Whitfield's audit, when I asked him directly whether the danger behind these rules stayed contained behind the facility's fence line or extended out into Alma Creek itself. Harold told me it had never been contained, not in all the years he had lived and worked in that part of the state. He said whatever moved through Vaughn Canyon after dark did not respect property lines or security clearances, and that people in Alma Creek had been quietly aware of something wrong in that area going back generations, long before the government ever built a testing facility out there. The facility had not created the danger, he said. It had been built on top of ground that already carried a reputation, decades before anyone in Washington decided it was a good location for propulsion testing. He told me, without much detail and clearly reluctant to say even that much, about a family in Alma Creek named Rays, who had lost their youngest son back in 1971, years before Vaughn Canyon existed as a facility at all. The boy had been playing outside after dinner, in a yard with a fence and porch lights on, well within sight of his parents' kitchen window, and within the space of maybe 10 minutes, he was simply gone. Harold said the search that followed involved the whole town and lasted for weeks, and the boy was never found, not a trace, and the official record to this day listed it as an unsolved disappearance. No evidence of foul play, no suspects ever identified. He told me the Rays family still lived in Alma Creek, an older couple now, and that nobody in town ever brought up their son's name around them, the same unspoken agreement that governed how nobody at the facility brought up Roswell. I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward, and about my father sitting at his kitchen table decades removed from Vaughn Canyon, still unable to leave that one rule unspoken. I understood, finally, that he had not been trying to protect me from something specific to his old job. He had been trying to protect me from something he believed could reach anywhere, following no rules of geography or security clearance, limited only by whether a child was inside a locked door after the sun went down. I started applying rule number 6 with a strictness that surprised even Laura, who had always been a reasonably relaxed parent about ordinary childhood risks. I was not doing it because of one specific incident involving Emma. Nothing had happened to her directly. I was doing it because every piece of understanding I had gathered since taking that job pointed toward the same conclusion, that whatever this was, it existed in the dark spaces at the edges of ordinary American life, patient, adaptable, and completely indifferent to fences, clearances, or official explanations. I told Laura, without going into specifics I knew she would never fully believe anyway, that I needed her to agree to a firm rule in our house, no exceptions, that Emma was never to go outside alone after dark, not to grab something from the car, not to check the mailbox, not for any reason at all, without one of us physically with her. Laura agreed, mostly because she trusted that something at that job had genuinely frightened me enough to ask, even without understanding exactly what. By the time I had been at Vaughn Canyon for 4 months, I no longer thought of the facility's perimeter fence as any kind of meaningful boundary. It was not protecting the people inside from whatever moved through that land at night, and it certainly was not containing it. The only boundary that had ever meant anything, going back to a family in 1971 who lost a son in their own fenced backyard, was the line between daylight and darkness, and even that boundary, I would soon learn, was not as reliable as any of us wanted to believe. I finished out my contract at Vaughn Canyon a little over a year and a half after I started, and I did not renew it when the option came up. Part of that decision was financial. We had saved enough by then to cover a gap while I found something closer to home. But if I am being honest, most of it was simply that I did not think I could survive watching a second person die out there the way I watched Marcus Webb die. And some quiet, certain part of me knew that if I stayed long enough, I eventually would. Before I left for good, Harold told me one more thing, standing by the gate on my last day, that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He said Vaughn Canyon was not unique. He said whatever fell or arrived, or however you want to describe it, near Roswell in the 1940s had not stayed in one place. Pieces of it, or knowledge of it, or something operating under the same 6 rules with different local variations, had been distributed to other government and contractor sites around the country over the following decades, spread out deliberately so that no single facility and no single family working at that facility would ever hold enough of the picture to understand the whole of it. He said he had heard rumors, nothing he could prove, about similar rules existing at similar isolated sites in at least 4 other states. I never verified that, and I do not know if I ever will. We moved to a new house outside Albuquerque a few months later, comfortable and ordinary, on a street with good schools and neighbors who host block parties every summer. I took a stable engineering job with reasonable hours and no laminated card listing rules nobody would explain to me. For the most part, life went back to normal. About 4 months after we moved, on an ordinary Tuesday night in early spring, I woke up a little after 2 in the morning to the sound of Emma's voice coming from just outside her bedroom window, calling for me. "Daddy, come outside. I dropped something in the yard. I need your help finding it." I sat straight up in bed. Laura was still asleep beside me. Emma's room was down the hall, and every instinct in me wanted to run straight to that window and see what she needed. The same instinct any parent would have at the sound of their child's voice in distress in the middle of the night. I made myself walk to Emma's door instead, quietly, and opened it just enough to look inside. She was asleep in her bed, exactly where she was supposed to be, breathing slow and even, completely undisturbed. I closed the door without waking her, walked back to my own room, and did not go anywhere near a window or a door leading outside for the rest of that night. In the morning, I checked the exterior of the house in full daylight. There was nothing unusual anywhere in the yard, no footprints in the soft dirt near the fence line, nothing dropped or disturbed. Nothing except a thin scattering of dirt across the windowsill outside Emma's room, dirt that, when I looked closer, was not quite the same reddish color as the soil anywhere else in our yard. I have not heard that voice again since that night. I check on Emma more often now than I probably need to, and our rule about her never going outside alone after dark has not been broken once, and will not be, for as long as I have any say in the matter. I do not know if whatever exists out past the fence line at Vaughn Canyon Test Annex has any real interest in following a family who left it behind, or if what I heard that night was something separate entirely, something that had always been capable of reaching this far, waiting for the right night and the right open window. I do not have an answer for that, and after everything I saw during that year and a half, I have stopped expecting one. If you have ever driven past a fenced-off stretch of land somewhere out in the desert, with a dirt road disappearing behind a locked gate and no sign telling you what happens on the other side, you might have wondered just for a second, what kind of work goes on back there? I would not spend too much time wondering if I were you. Some questions come with rules attached, whether anyone bothers to hand you the list or not. I still have my father's notebook. It sits in a drawer in my nightstand now, close enough to reach in the dark. 6 rules in his handwriting, pressed hard enough into the paper to feel on the other side. I have already started teaching Emma the 6th one. That's the complete story. Ready for the next title, thumbnail text, and rules set whenever you are.